Welcome to Table Talk Reviews. This video is the How to Play for Comic Hunters, designed by Robert Coelho. This game is all about trying to amass the biggest and most valuable collection of Marvel comic books. Currently only published by Bucaneros in Brazil. If you manage to import a copy, this video should teach you everything you need to know to get started playing. Before we get into how to play, let's take a look at the comic cards. The comic cards come in 3 different decks, separated by ages. Age 1 is comics from the 2000s and onward. Age 2 is comics from the 80s and 90s. And Age 3 is comics from the 60s and 70s. On the front of the card, you'll see a picture of the comic cover and symbols indicating which heroes are in that comic. Sometimes there will be multiple heroes featured on a comic. Below that, you will see highlight icons telling you special things about that comic. For example, this Black Widow comic is a collector's edition and has a new look for the Black Widow character. This Doctor Strange comic is a #1 issue and has some epic battle in it. This Tales of Suspense Iron Man and Black Widow comic has the appearance of a new character, in this case, Black Widow. Below the highlight icons is the market value of that comic, which matches the age of the deck it's from. Age 1 comics cost 1, Age 2 comics cost 2, and Age 3 comics cost 3. To set up the board, you need to establish which heroes have the highest value. This is the trending heroes chart. If you're playing with less than 4 players, remove 2 character tokens from the game, and then place 1 hero token on the top row, 2 in the middle, and 3 in the bottom row. This table tells you how many cards you need to score how many points. So if you have a collection at the end of the game with 5 Spider-Man comics, it will score you 12 points. In a 4-player game, the middle row will have 3 and the bottom row will have 4 characters. To set up the highlights track for your first game, select one of these 3 tokens at random to be the 3rd desirable feature. So for this game, #1 issues are most valuable, as well as new character appearances and comics with big versus battles. For future games, you can fully randomize the 3 highlighted features that will be desirable for each game. Separate the cards into their individual age decks, and then remove 10 cards from each deck. If you're playing with 1 or 2 players, you will only need 6 cards from Age 1. Shuffle these all together to create the 4th deck used for the comic convention. Comic Hunters is played over 3 rounds. During each round, you will visit 3 of the 4 locations and then organize your collection. You can see which locations you'll be visiting each round on the schedule. Location A is the comic book shop, where you'll deal 4 cards to each player, and then players will select one of their cards to keep, passing 3 cards to the next player. Then they will again repeat, selecting a card from one of the 3, passing 2 cards. From those 2 cards, they'll select 1 more card and pass their last card. They'll now have 4 cards they selected in their hand. The B location is a flea market where you can find older comics from Age 2. To play this round, flip cards from the blue deck to create rows equal to the number of players. In this example, I will show 3 players. On a player's turn, they have the choice to flip a card and add it to one of the existing rows. And then it is the next player's turn, and they can add it to a different row. Or players can choose to take all cards in a single row. Once a player has taken cards, they will no longer add cards to the rows, and you can never add cards to an empty row that has been selected. A row of cards can only have 4 maximum. If all rows are maxed out at 4, players must select a row of cards to take on their turn. Once all players have selected their cards, the player with the start player marker will select any other player to become the start player for the next round, and you'll move on to the next location. Location C is an auction website like eBay where you can get older comics from the 60s and 70s. Deal from the age 3 deck, a row of 5 cards, a row of 3 cards, and then rows of 4 cards up to the number of players. With a 3-player game, there will only be 1 row of 4. In a 4-player game, you will have 2 rows of 4. Starting with the first player, they can select any row they choose and begin the bidding with a value of 1 or more. Each player must then choose to outbid the previous bid or pass. Once all players have passed, the highest bid takes the comics in the selected row. So if I chose to bid here and I won it with 7, I would take all of these comics into my hand. If the first player wins the first auction, the next player clockwise around the table will start the bidding for the next auction. If another player wins the auction, the first player will start the bidding again on the next row of their choice. Once there is only 1 player remaining who has not won an auction, they will simply pay 1 for each card in the remaining row. Then the first player will select a new player to become the start player for the next round. Players pay for their auction winnings by moving their token along this secret stash track. This is your secret stash of comics that have value. All players start the game with a value of 15. If the green player wins an auction of value 6, they move their token down 6 spaces and they will have a value of 9 to bid in future rounds. Keep in mind that this track is worth points at the end of the game, so the more money you can keep in your secret stash, the better. The last location is the convention. This is where you can get comics of all different ages. To set up this phase, deal out a 5x5 grid of cards with the missing center card. So here, I'll skip this space and continue dealing out cards. On a player's turn, they can select any row or column of cards and pick a hero and take all of the comics with that hero symbol from that row or column. Before selecting, they can take a card and slide it as many spaces as it can freely move. The first player will only have the option of these 4 cards to slide into the middle. Once cards have been taken, there will be more spaces to slide around. Here the first player might choose to slide this Spider-Man comic down into the center row and then select these 3 cards. Here you can see 2 Thor comics that the next player wants. So they might slide this Thor comic into this row, or column rather, and select all the Thor comics in that column. After each player has made 1 selection, the last player will take a second turn and it will go in the opposite direction, ending with the first player. So the first player selects first, then player 2, then player 3, then player 3 selects again, then player 2, then player 1. Any cards left at the end of this phase are shuffled back into the convention deck for future rounds. And once again, the first player selects a new player to be first in the next round. After the convention, players will organize their collections. Let me demonstrate an example of that now. To start a collection of comics, you must have at least 2 cards of the same hero. So I can use these to start a collection of Doctor Strange comics. Similarly, I have 3 Spider-Man comics. I want to start a Spider-Man collection. If you're playing with less than 4 players and a character token was removed from the board during setup, you cannot start a collection of comics for that hero. To add these comics to your collection, you must pay for them. To pay for comics, you use the remaining cards in your hand. You can keep a maximum of 2 cards to carry over to the next round, and any cards you don't put in your collection will be discarded to the convention deck. Here, I want to keep these 2 Spider-Man cards for future rounds, so I can use these 3 cards of value 3, 3, and 2, a total of 8, to pay for my total of 8 for my Spider-Man and Doctor Strange comics. My remaining cards are shuffled in to the convention deck, and now I update the highlight track. I have 2 #1 appearances of Doctor Strange, so I'll put my token on 2 on the #1 highlight track. I have 2 first appearances of new characters in my Spider-Man collection. I'll put it on 2, and this versus symbol does not score me any additional points, as it is not a desired feature on the highlight track in this example. The cards used to pay for your collection are also discarded to the convention deck. When paying to add cards to your collection, if you ever have to overpay, the excess is lost. My cards have a value of 8. I only have cards totaling a value of 9 left in my hand. I don't get anything extra for overpaying. It is also during this step that you can reorganize your collection. Say in future rounds, I've added these 2 Spider-Man comics and started a collection of Hulk comics. This collection of Hulk comics is too small to score points, so I might want to move this Spider-Man and Hulk comic over into my Hulk collection, so now that both my Spider-Man collection and my Hulk collection will be scoring me points at the end of the game. After the 3rd round, it's time to score and see who has the most valuable collection. At the end of the game, I had 3 Hulk cards in a collection, which will score me 4 points. I had 8 Spider-Man cards, that will score me 24 points. And lastly, I had 4 Black Panther cards, that scores me 5 points. Because I had 3 different hero collections that were size 3 comics or more, I score a bonus of 5 points. This is the number of hero collections you have, and this is the number of points extra you get. Collections must be 3 or more comics, so those collections of only 2 comics will not count towards these points. Then we look at the secret stash track and add points for the remaining money you have in that collection. Green player has 6, orange 8, and yellow 9. Lastly, we take a look at the highlights track. The player with the most in each track will score 15 points, second most 12, and last will score 3 points in a 3-player game. Points here for 4-player game and 2-player game. So for collecting number 1s, the yellow player will score 15 points, the orange will score 12, and green will score 3 points. In the case of a tie here for first place, you'll take the 15 points and the 12 points, add it together, and share it amongst the tied players. 27 points divided by 2 is 13 points as you round down, and player 3 will get 3 points. Now total up your points, and whoever has the most valuable collection is the winner. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy playing Comic Hunters.